Hello there. This video is specifically made for those who want to learn synthesis from scratch. We're going to use a modular software, a modular synth software, to explain how a synthesizer is built. So this is going to be useful if you want to do anything about modular synthesis. It's a great video to start with. It's going to be good for anybody who wants to use any type of synthesizer that you never understand really quite how it works. So we're going to explain what are oscillators, filters, envelopes, LFO, and the way to interconnect all of these. How do they work basically? And we're doing that with Moomu modular synthesizer. The presets I'm going to use and I'm building here are for Moomu, and they will be available in Moomu at one point. I don't know if it's going to be out when I release this video. If not, do as I did on screen and you'll understand. And even if you don't have Moomu, these concepts apply to any synthesizer, and you'll be able to take what you learn here and use it in your own synthesizer. That's for sure. Now, let's start with the notion of what is a synthesizer. Most of us, when we talk about the synthesizer, we talk about one device, one piece of gear, a keyboard mostly, that has a controller where you can play and a brain that generates sounds. The synthesizer part is the brain, because the controller could be anything. Could be a guitar controller, could be a keyboard, could be a pad, could be whatever it is. The brain itself is the synthesizer. It's the part that generates sound, is the sound generator if you want. If you go back in time, when we started making synthesizers, the first one, were not a one box closed system. They were basically modules before we understood the best interaction between these modules and what each modules could do. Well, it was only modular synthesizers. Robert Moog, for example, was one of the pioneers of the synthesizer. And the reason is simple, is that Robert Moog would be in constant contact and exchange with musicians like, for example, Wendy Carlos. He would basically try to understand how a musician would use a synthesizer, a modular synthesizer, and even design some of the modules to answer the request of the composers. And one day he said, well, what most people need to be able to play this as a musical instrument, because a modular synth can be much more than just a musical instrument, it could be just a sound generating tool, but to be able to play it like an instrument, well, these are the modules we need. And this structure is still today the structure that we see in most synthesizers. Of course, the sources change, the way that the sound is processed and treated will change, but it's the same logic and the same structure that we see. Basically, together, we'll build a simple subtractive synthesizer in Moomu. So let's start with how a synthesizer works. Now, there's many different modules that you have to work with, and to be able to understand how it works, before that, we have to go back into what is sound, because these modules will control part of the sound. So what part do we want to control as a musician to be able to play and have a musical performance by the instrument, which is the synthesizer? So let's load the first one. One thing that is interesting here is to use colors to represent different type of cables, because in a synthesizer, there's different type of signals you can use, and we'll talk about that also. But the first thing I want to talk about is sound itself before we talk about the synthesizer. Now, in this patch, what we have is an analyzer, what's called a spectrum analyzer. It shows you all the internal frequencies that the source, which is this one here, which is a VCO, which is a voltage controlled oscillator. That's the oscillation, the raw source that we play with, and send it to a split, which is a through, and the split is sent to, well, A here, so analyzer, B here, the scope, C here, the tuner, and in D, the audio out. So we actually hear this signal if we bring the volume up. Now, if I change the pitch of this, you see that the sound changes. You see the internal content, the harmonics of the signal. If I change the shape, if I go back to a sine wave, You see the sine wave only have one frequency, and we call it a sine wave because this physically is the look that we have on the scope. When we look at the oscillation shape, it is this. It's a sine wave. And as this one, we can control the harmonics, can bring them more in. You see the shape is changing from sine wave to something else, more towards a sawtooth, and the harmonics starts to appear. So the shape, like this now is this is a sawtooth, you see. So the sawtooth has a different sound than the sine wave, and we see all the frequency that we have here, and we can bring it a little bit more like this. What we see here is basically three things. We have the note, the frequency, the pitch, which is the one we have by changing the octave or the semitone here. And you see that the cycle on the scope changes, so the length of the frequency changes. So a longer frequency means a lower pitch, and a shorter frequency, so it vibrates faster, means higher pitch. So a high note or a low note, basically, in musical sense. And you see the note on the side here. You see this is C1 right now. So if I change this to higher, let's say you get a C3. So the value changes depending on the pitch and the frequency you're playing. And if you want to know, you can just click on it here. It tells you that this one is at 262, which is a C3, 6.3 cents. So it's not exactly on a C3. It's close, but it's not exactly, because you can tune that. And what we see here from top to bottom, the oscillation amplitude, so the amplitude being the amount of distance between the zero value and the maximum, and this is the volume. The amplitude of the movement equals for us loudness, volume, sound. So that's why here in the amplifier, when we bring it up, we hear it. But keep in mind that an oscillator is always oscillating. So even without the rest of a synthesizer, this thing is still just playing along, just generating an oscillation all the time. We have three things: pitch, the note, the harmonic content, the timbre, the sound signature if you want. So this is, in this case, and the one we have right now, it's really just this one here playing with the shape. As we play with the shape, we change the shape here. We can see that the scope changes, the shape has changed. And because it's changed, the analyzer shows us different frequencies, because as the shape changes, the harmonic content changes also. The complexity of the frequency found in the sound changes more or less. So if you're closer to one frequency, then what you have is a sine wave. It's just one frequency, it's just a sine wave. It's the root key. Now, keep in mind, just for the fun understanding how it works, as we bring the frequency up, you see that the first one, the sine wave, the root key, the fundamental, the note that we're playing, if we, let's say we play a C3, basically we hear the first one, the lowest notes usually. And everything else is just harmonics. It's just timbre, is the sound of it. When you play a string, when you play a violin, when you play a trumpet, when you play a piano, it sounds different, but the C3 that you're playing is the same. So the lowest note, the root key, the one that is linked to the note playing, is the lowest usually. When I say usually, because sometimes we get sub-frequencies, but it's part of just beefing up your sound. And everything over that is basically the signature or the identification of the sound, to be able to say, hey, that's a piano, oh, that's the violin, oh, that's the drum, whatever it is. The recognition of the sound is made by the timbre, and it's part of the harmonic content like we see here. Okay, so that's how a sound is. Now, in case of Moomu modular synthesizer, we have three oscillators that we can use as a sound source. We have the sine VCO, the one we just talked about. We have a sine VCO that is a bit more complex. You see that you've got the octave and the semitone like we have here. But we don't have a shape. We have a feedback, we have an FM depth, we have a ratio, we have unison. So this one basically has frequency modulation. So it has some FM synthesis built into this. The feedback is a good signal to tell you that this is FM synthesis. So it means that this oscillator can send signal to itself and become richer or more complex. Let's just patch this out so you can see what I mean by that. This one, no feedback. You have the sine wave, and as you bring the feedback up, it becomes closer to a sawtooth. So you have also unison. So basically unison, you've got multiple versions of the same sound being played, so it becomes a wider sound or a richer sound. And it's a little bit detuned. As you bring up, you have more sources. So it kind of clones the same oscillators many times. And you see now they're slightly detuned, and that's what you hear. You hear that beating of the sounds. The last one is the wavetable. The wavetable is a table of index where each of these index is a different snapshots of a sound, of one cycle of a sound. And as you move between the different index or the different frames of that table, you're moving between different snapshots. So you see, as I'm going up, it changes the shape of it because it actually captured a different shape and it sounds different. Of course, the frequency content changes and the harmonics changes. You go from sine wave to triangular to sawtooth to square wave. What's interesting here is that the wavetable VCO is generating the most common used shape of oscillators on analog synthesis. So sine, triangular, sawtooth, and square. A real square wave would have a pulse width modulation, and this one doesn't have it, but in other synthesizers you would have a pulse width. So you could change that width of the pulse because you've got a top and bottom here, and that width could change without changing the whole cycle. So it changes the sound of it because you're changing the shape, and changing the shape means you're changing the harmonic content and the frequency, so it doesn't sound the same. So in this case you can't, but you have this option of moving this, and this is really flexible and gives you a wide array of changes in the harmonic content. In the synthesizer, usually what we have, these three. We got a VCO that goes into a filter, and the filter goes into a VCA. So we have the three parts we said: the pitch, the timbre, and the volume, the amplifier. We have the pitch here because we have the octave, we have the frequency playing. As you change the octave, you're changing the pitch. Octave down, I'm going to bring that back up. It goes up. And you have the filter. So of course, we said earlier that if I change the shape here, you're changing the timbre, of course. But in subtractive synthesis, the filter is a really big, important part because it does play with the content of the frequencies. So you see the lowest key and all the harmonics. This is open up. The shape is kind of weird. It's because of the type of filter. There's different type of filter. It's a low pass filter, so it let the lower frequency pass, and then it cuts everything that is over the value of the cutoff point. So if I move this, you'll see that it's cutting here the frequencies, and it changes the shape also. So it tells you that if you can control this in real time, you can change in real time how the sound evolves. And that's important because in a lot of instruments, when you play it, the richness of the sound comes in the beginning, the attack, the build-up of the sound, and then it stays or dies out. And if it dies out, it just goes away. But if it stays, it's sustained depending on how the instrument can sustain the sound. Most time it will sustain at a harmonic content that is less than the beginning of the sound, usually. In this case, there's different model of the filter. Over the years, there's different ways to build filters. So that's why we have a clean, we have a mellow, we have a dark, which is darker, less high frequencies. We have a moody that has a... And the moody is interesting when you start to bring the resonance. Resonance, you know that sound. So the resonance is basically you're boosting the frequencies here around the cutoff point, and as I'm bringing that up, you see it's here now, and you see it go down. So this one, the moody, is a model that boosts even more the frequency, so it's more obvious. This one also is a good one. So you can easily see the movement here. So now, I think that it's obvious what we can do with it. The question will be, how do we control that? The next video is going to be about how to control these sounds. I'm going to start with using the envelopes. So explaining how the different envelopes, and actually in this synthesizer, there's 4 different envelopes you can work with. So let's just explain that next video. See you soon.